Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second session. I am going to turn over the intros to Liz Bennett with Commerce Lexington. First, we have just a couple of housekeeping items. In case you have questions as we go throughout today, there is a Q&A item at the bottom of your screen, and you can ask any questions that you'd like. We also have a couple of questions that Debbie and I particularly want to ask related to some law items and the times that we have going on right now. So with that being said, Liz, we've got quite a few people on right now, so they're anxious to hear you. We are ready for your intro.
Oh yeah, they're all here for me, right? So, no, you wouldn't want to hear me speak for an hour, but welcome everyone to the second version of our 4 o'clock focus. And this series is just kind of, for now, focusing on what's next as far as when we go back to work and what our lives going to look like after all this is hopefully over soon. So today we're going to talk, last week we talked more about opening up. This week we're going to talk about legal guidance and compliance in the new workplace and what that kind of looks like, and what maybe questions, risks, what do we need to be looking at about not just opening, but doing it correctly. So I'm going to turn it over again to Bill and Debbie, who are really the rock stars of moderators. So you all take it away. And thank you, Adrienne and Faith, for joining us from Dinsmore.
Thanks so much, Liz. I love to be referred to as a rock star. It makes my day.
Even though Bill is rocker.
I was going to say, you can come over and join us. You can join us.
Again, I'm Debbie Green. I'm a strategic marketing consultant with the company Bringing in the Green. And Bill and I wanted to partner with Commerce Lexington to try to bring some very relevant and timely facts to the business leaders and community members as we're going through this together. It's important that we partner and learn from each other and be as efficient as possible with learning best practices so that we're not all each individually reinventing the wheel. So we're really thrilled to have so many participants and registrants. I know we have about 175 people that have expressed an interest in the program. The feedback that we got last week on the surveys was very beneficial. So thank you all so much for taking the time to fill those out. But moving into the content for today, we'll plan on introducing Faith and Adrienne, and they will each speak for about 10 to 12 minutes with their respective areas. And then we also have some questions like Phil mentioned that we've already received, but all of you feel free to ask questions. And if we see a question come up on the chat that's pertinent to something one of the ladies is speaking about at the time, we'll interrupt and ask the question. So this is intended to be as relevant and as hard-hitting and informative as possible in a short period of time. So let me introduce Adrienne Strong and Faith Whittaker. They are both partners at the Dinsmore Law Firm. Faith is going to kick us off today. She is a recent co-author of Return to Work Checklist for Employers, which is one of the reasons why when we saw her post that last week, we thought she'd be a great resource, and the Dinsmore firm in general. She holds her JD from Northern Kentucky University, and she chairs the firm's employment practice group. And then Adrienne also is a partner, and she represents clients in all varieties of commercial litigation, ranging from general contract disputes to fiduciary. Faith is going to focus today on more national, broad legal guidelines to be thinking about and best practices in general employment practices. And then Adrienne's going to bring it down kind of to the Kentucky level and even to the local level, even further for things that we here in Lexington and Kentucky should be thinking about. So Faith, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for having us today, and we really appreciate the opportunity. I know last week you talked about a lot of returning to work and sanitation and social distancing and all those various things. A lot of it from the employer-employee standpoint is, to me, really about gaining back the trust. And if you hear screaming, that's my 2-year-old upstairs. So I apologize. We're working from home. We're all figuring it out as we can.
That is exactly right. Yes.
And I apologize for that. But a lot of it's about trust. Your employees may not trust coming back. They may be fearful. Employers want operations. We want retention. We want to make sure that we're running a business smoothly. So it's sort of combining all of those things together and trying to gain back the confidence of employees. So some high level things, though, of course, coming back doesn't have has a lot of risk with it. So I wanted to kind of share some things that I think are going to be some really complicated issues that are going to be something specific you need to think about for your business. This isn't a one size fits all for each thing, but just more of issue spotting and some general things to think about when you're planning your return. The big thing that we get all the time, big question is, what if an employee refuses to return? They say, I don't want to come back. I don't feel safe. I'm not going to do it. And a lot of the questions that come in with that are, can we just fire them? If they don't come back, we've got work for them. So what we've encouraged employers to be is as flexible as possible, given these timings. It may be that there's an individual circumstance. Maybe it's a health issue, and then the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Kentucky equivalent comes into play, and we need to go through that individual interactive process to determine, is there a reasonable accommodation? Can we work with this individual? The other thing is, even if there's not an individual health issue, there may be some sort of whistleblower type claim I can foresee. If, let's say, the employer says, you've got to come back, and the employee said, I've voiced my safety concern, I don't think it's right. And then what if they contract the virus, or someone in their household gets it, and then there's some other issue, I warned you, and then now you've got a retaliation type of claim. So again, working through options and being as flexible as possible, I think is going to be important. The other question on this, under the same vein, is, what if an employee refuses to wear the facial coverings? We've got this, and Adrianne's going to talk more about it, but we've got these orders on requiring the facial coverings. What if the employee says, I don't want to wear it, I'm not going to wear it? Well, again, I urge employers not to have a bright line rule. If they don't wear it, they're fired, or if they don't wear it, they can't come into work, because it may be, again, a medical issue that we need to look into and determine whether or not there's a different way about being safe at work, in the workplace, or also a religious accommodation issue could be, or something else. So just, again, those types of issues to think about. Another thing that we're seeing, and it's a huge hot button issue, is the temperature checks. Every guidance we see is CDC, OSHA, everyone, you should do the temperature checks. I know the Kentucky order, we should health screen, including temperature checks. But no one said specifically how that is supposed to happen. There really is no perfect answer, and we're all sort of figuring out as we go. I beg of you to think of different things, such as who will do them. Will you have a manager do them? Well, what manager? Is that going to sort of implicate an exemption issue if they're spending a lot of time learning the process, taking time to do these temperature checks outside of their actual duties? You think about a wage and hour piece of it. Also, are they going to be safe? They should have the proper PPE to be able to take the temperatures. Even if it's a forehead thermometer, they're still going to get within 6 feet. If you have the employee do it, because a lot of our clients are having the employees self-administer the health screening and before they come in, do we trust them? Are they going to still really want to come in and get their hours and get paid, or are they going to be trustworthy? Also, where are you going to do this? A lot of the guidance is we don't want people coming in prior to the screening, but what if your location doesn't have a private area, and we don't really want, the temperatures to be shown for everybody else. We want to keep it as confidential and private as possible. So where are you going to have this? And with that, there may be sort of a wage and hour issue for your non-exempt employees. If they've got to wait outside or wait in a long line, social distancing, how long does that take each day before they are able to clock in? So it may be a donning and doffing type of situation where if it's more than de minimis amount, it could be something we need to compensate them for. What we don't want, though, is for them to go through the facilities, touching a bunch of things, and then clocking in, depending on what you've got for your system, and then going back and getting their temperature. And what if it's over 100? And what if they end up testing positive? So those sorts of things to think through are important, and having a policy in place, a procedure to also log. Are you going to have specifics in the logs, or are you going to just check yes or no for symptoms and those types of pieces of it? So those are, again, employment-related topics that I think they're yet to be seen, but it's going to come up as well. Another thing.
Can I ask you a question real quick? There are some technology companies that we work with, big wholesalers, and they are promoting these temperature check stations where within 2 seconds, it's facial recognition and the temperature's taken. And so, if you have a number of employees that need to have this done, I mean, it seems like you can do it very, very quickly. Now, regardless of the data and the compliance and HIPAA and all these other things about somebody's medical data. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that there aren't any real hard and fast rules right now, other than be flexible with things as they change. And then to stay in touch across both, for larger companies, it's going to be the executive team plus any other trusted third-party advisors like a firm like Dinsmore. How many requests are you seeing for this information per day? I imagine you all are putting in some hours right now. Is that a safe assumption?
It's a safe assumption. We're happy to be able to help. But that question, the temperature question, I would say I get about 3 a day. And then the mask question is a big one now. So that's, constantly, do we have to make people wear masks? How does that look? Mm-hmm. What about our clients? What about our customers? So you're right. What's difficult about it is no one's saying, here's how you do it, or here's specifically. I mean, even when the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission finally said, you can do temperature checks, because that's right. Before it was considered a medical exam and you had to have specific high standards to be able to do it. Now we can do it, but no one says how exactly to do that in a better way. So we're also seeing a lot of our clients collaborate, just like with this, talking about different businesses and how are you doing, and even down to what kind of temperature or thermometer to use. I actually had polled a number of my clients to see what kind of thermometer you're using, because I don't know, I didn't look into it, but they just want to know, is there something better than just going to the pharmacy and getting one of those those forehead ones, just like you had mentioned, Bill, and that technology that's out there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm really curious. It's a great thing, but like every other tech product right now, their website says, due to overwhelming response, we are making these as fast as we can and trying to get them out. So I think one of the other things that, and we touched on this a little bit last week, we don't need to be thinking about just tomorrow or the day after. We need to be thinking about 2 to 3 months from now. What are we going to need? I placed an order for headsets, and it's technically out of stock, but the rep that we work with says you're going to get them in 3 to 4 weeks. Well, 3 to 4 weeks from now is not normally how I plan to get an emergency piece of equipment. And so I don't know because I know you will have put together some checklists for some things. I don't know if you want to mention that now for what's going to come later, or if you want to get to it, but it's a really neat list of things that you will have that all of the people who are attending today are going to have access to after this is over. So I won't steal the thunder there. You go ahead and talk about those things.
Absolutely. Well, with the checklist, we have it actually right on our website. If you go to dinsmore.com, it's the first thing that pops up, and it takes you to our business strategies hub that we've created just for COVID-19. And it has so much information, daily updates on various things that are going on, various topics from not just employment or litigation, but corporate tax, benefits, various things. Frequently asked questions and that. So just in addition to the checklist, we've also have various things on our hub that you can go to after this. And I think, Bill, you're going to send also the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, yes. The FMLA, and the paid sick leave flow chart we created, which I think is helpful for the businesses that are under 500 employees,
yes.
Who need to comply with that. And so that's another topic that I was going to say, I think is going to have an uptick in claims. And so my advice is to make sure that you've updated your policies, your procedures with respect to analyzing those requests when they come in, and particularly the forms that a lot of this is all new. So no one has a lot of the forms. So we've been creating a lot of the forms for our clients, and I encourage you to look at what you've got so you can assess those situations, because I think it's going to be challenging in analyzing who is going to be covered under it. And it may be a combination even of regular Family Medical Leave Act and the Families First Leave Act. So that flowchart hopefully will help people sort of think this through when they need to cover the different leaves.
So we've got our first question regarding these masks. Are you ready? And for those of you who are attendees on our practice session, I said I cannot wait to ask attorneys a yes or no question. So we've heard before that we are going to get some things that are going to be, well, it depends, and I think this question's one of them. So someone says, regarding masks in particular, if we've got an employee who does not have a religious or health reason to exclude from wearing, what should we do if they refuse? As we know, if one refuses and is allowed not to wear it, others can refuse as well. At some point, many of the workforce may not wear it, and then we could be seen as negligent employers and overall non-compliant. So what are your thoughts about that? And Adrienne, just as these questions are for both of you, you all are the experts. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, my thought is, not the lawyerly answer. I'm actually going to say, I agree with this, the person who asked the question, that unless there's some other protected reason that we can make an exception, you do need to be consistent with your rules. And this is just following the guidance from the CDC, the Kentucky, and any other applicable orders. And you've got to keep people safe. So again, it's about earning that trust to instill confidence in employees. So if you are allowing everyone just to, okay, sure, you don't have to wear it tomorrow, just because you don't feel like it, that's not gonna work and make other people feel safe and confident that they're going to be okay going to work. So I actually will say, no, you can stick with your rule if you don't have another reason that's protected.
Nice. Okay. Thank you.
And I'll echo Faith just with the Kentucky specific regulations, like she mentioned. I mean, those regulations at this point establish the minimum requirements for all businesses. And right now they say that businesses must ensure to the greatest extent practicable that employees need to be wearing those masks. So you're backed up a little by the state regulations in that position as well. And so it's not just we want you to be doing this. It's we have to be doing this in order to be open and operating right now.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. That was the one question. So keep on going to enlighten us some more.
Okay. Well, I hope to. Just actually one other thing that I wanted to point out on sort of a high level piece to think about is protecting those who are more susceptible for severe illness with respect to the virus. Mm-hmm. A lot of our clients are concerned for those folks. And just to reiterate, those are, there's a laundry list that the CDC has, but people that are over 65, heart conditions, liver issues, autoimmune issues, and various other aspects that may make them more susceptible to severe illness. Our clients want to protect these people, but they don't want to call them out and, email these people directly, especially if they don't even maybe know. They just assume that this one person's going through cancer treatment. So it may be that their immune system's down and it might be more susceptible. So, that's one thing to think about how you want to handle that situation. What we've recommended to a number of clients when it makes sense is to do a general notice reiterating what the CDC says as far as these conditions and what is more susceptible, and then indicating a place where employees can go to talk to someone confidentially if they believe that they are more at risk and they need to work out something else as opposed to returning to work. So that's our recommendation, as opposed to saying, hey, Sally, I know you've got this issue and we think you shouldn't come into work. So that's making a lot of assumptions. It could violate other issues. And so this way, also with just calling out all the people over 65, we don't want to have an age claim if we're just focusing on them. Even if our intention is good, we still just want to be careful on how we do it. But with that, I'd be happy to take it over to Adrienne on talking about the specifics of Kentucky and some other things.
That works. Thank you, Faith. So I think, again, I'm going to cover kind of the more specific Kentucky regulations, while she has the idea of the greater landscape of what we're all working with here. And I think, to echo what she already said, flexibility is kind of key. On a broad strokes, I think even the minimum requirements for all businesses in Kentucky stress that you do need to have a plan. You need to be ready. You need to anticipate all of these issues. But I think from a legal perspective too, you have to have flexibility within that plan to make certain accommodations for people, and just to provide for the changing landscape that we're in. I think if you're familiar with the regulations I'm going to talk about here in a second, that they were issued on Monday. So, we're operating on a really quick schedule here where we're getting guidance and having to implement it quicker than most people have ever had to do in their businesses before. And so that scares a lot of people, and we understand. And that's where a lot of the questions that we're getting are coming from is, normally you have a lot more time to plan for these things. And here we're working on a really quick pace. So, I don't want to just read the regulations to everyone because I'm assuming if everybody's here, I'm assuming if everybody.
I'm going to watch that attendee number drop if you start reading regulations.
I understand. So, if everyone's here, you probably have a general understanding of what the governor has put out recently. You know that phase 1 of this reopening starts on Monday, May 11th, and that is geared toward a specific group of industry. So that's manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, construction, vehicle and vessel dealerships, office-based businesses can operate at 50% capacity, photography, and horse racing, since we're in Kentucky, but with no fans. And so that's kind of this first wave, and that's going to kind of be the test group, right? We're going to see how things work. I know some clients and some businesses we're dealing with are even saying they're going to wait a couple of days or maybe even a week or two to see how this first wave kind of goes, what problems come up, what things arise before they really dive into opening their office up. And I think that's something we're going to see from several places because everyone's a little anxious, a little apprehensive about how it's going to work. But in Kentucky, again, it is good that I think we do have these minimum baseline requirements that have now been set by Governor Beshear. So I've been looking for a couple of clients that we have nationwide at several other states in addition to Kentucky. And I think we're lucky in a way that we've got these baseline requirements because it, to me, gives our clients more assurance about what they need to do. If it's a state that's opening without much guidance, it's a lot scarier of a situation that you may not be doing what you need to do in order to protect yourself from liability going forward. But here, because we have these minimum requirements for all businesses, that, again, gives you a baseline that you have to go from so that I'm not going to say it's a safety net because we don't know what's going to come of this in the future, but it definitely gives you a guidance to follow going forward rather than just kind of taking a shot in the dark. So to kind of work through these a little bit, and questions, if Bill or Debbie, if you all have questions along the way, or if questions come up, because I think some of these things, we've already touched on a few, but some may bring up other more specific questions. So starting with, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so at the intersection of all of this coming out on a regular basis, one of the things, that Beshear got a lot of great press is how he came out early, and that is a regular address. It is something people can count on, whether they call it Beers with Beshear or it's my time to be relaxed because I know what's going on. Well, I'm curious, the information is coming in very quickly. And then Debbie, as a marketing professional, do you think that companies should have a daily update or a once every so often update out not only to their employees, but their customers and also their vendors? How are you seeing that happen right now?
Absolutely. So I'm fortunate enough to work with about 10 local companies and a couple that are actually out of state. And every single one of them has some form of either daily or every other day communication with their employees. So even if it is a simple email, some people are on a group app for employers that don't have, where some employees don't have access to email. So, but everybody has a cell phone. And so they're maybe in a join me or a group me, and they're able to communicate regularly. Those messages are ranging from anywhere having to do with guidelines, like Adrienne was just speaking about, formal guidelines and policies, but also are meant to be uplifting and positive. And they always start with, we hope you're staying safe and healthy, and, we care about you. In terms of customer or external facing messages, yes, all of my clients have updates on the website as to socially responsible practices that we're engaging in, especially for those companies that I work with that have been allowed to remain open in some capacity. So we're trying to send regular reassuring messages to people that we're taking the guidelines seriously from the CDC, and that we want to make any sort of accommodations that we can. The last thing I'll say that I think is important is that businesses, I have never seen businesses evolve so quickly to be able to stay open and stay relevant. And it just makes me so proud to work with these small business owners that have just been, they felt like the rug's kind of been pulled out from under them. But instead of burying their head in the sand, they're thinking of the next great idea, and they're getting as ramped up as quickly as possible. So thanks, Bill, for the question, but those are just some of my thoughts.
Yeah, we do have another question in, and this one is from, I won't use the last name in case anybody wants to be private. It's from Jim, and it says, and I've got a tech response to this, but I'm curious about the legal response to this. So if an employer is allowing an employee to work from home, and the employee's job duties require the use of a computer or internet, is the employer required to pay or reimburse the employee for the expense of the computer if it's personal and the internet service? So from a legal perspective, what's required?
I'll let you start if you know, Faith.
Please say it depends.
It's interesting that I'm going to say we have had so many questions on so many different things, and that one has yet to come up. So that's a good thought. I mean, my initial thought is that if it's required, then we do need to at least provide it or have some sort of means of making sure that they have it. So at least with our firm, I know that, and this might get into the tech answer a little bit, our firm doesn't really want, for security reasons, you to be accessing on your personal devices, least amount as possible. So I think that's one aspect, to keep it on a company laptop. So I know that might not financially make the most sense. The other thing to think about, though, is from a control aspect. So if, again, if it's the private computer and it's their own internet, what if it ends up sort of having some security risks there? So those are just things. That's my initial answer. It's not really an answer, Jim. You kind of stumped the lawyers a little bit, just because we haven't had that come up. I haven't specifically looked at it. Adrienne, any thoughts from a litigation perspective on that?
Not litigation necessarily. I do feel like I may have seen something in another state, and I'm going to be pretty vague there because I can't remember where it was, that may have started requiring that. I'm not aware of anything in Kentucky that there have been any requirements that an employer pay any type of those expenses. It's something to keep an eye out for, because, depending on how long this goes on, that could be something on the horizon, but I'm not aware of any Kentucky specific requirements as of yet.
Okay. And we did have someone Greg, who works at a tech company, saying the other thing is the employee may have to upgrade the internet, because not only are we doing calls like this, but you probably have students at home. I know my boys are doing Zoom calls almost as frequently as I am, and we're having to figure out where do you go in the house to get that done so that people aren't, overrunning one another. I will echo the comment that you made, Faith. The default choice is not to access work data of any kind on personal machines. And then there's also a flip side to that, and that is, just because you have work equipment at home, you need to make sure that your kids aren't using it for their homework either, because almost every single employee signs an agreement saying anything you can and do on this machine is the company's property. We can do pretty much anything we want. So I would recommend that if someone needs to do something from a personal device, it's only in the rarest of circumstances. There are ways to set that up and protect it. If people are curious about how to do that, just send me a message in the question or in the survey afterwards, and I'll give you a couple tips there. We also had another one come in that says, in an instance where an employer follows the CDC guidelines and their employees are wearing gloves and a mask and instructed to follow hand washing guidelines. However, if one employee has been to work after contracting COVID-19 and others become infected, what liability will the employer have? And what happens if someone dies as a result of it contracted at work? And I hate to be morbid, but there's probably more than just one person wondering this question.
It's a huge question. And that's why, as Adrienne talked about, the baseline and sort of doing these things. We don't know the exact answer. I don't know how the courts are going to actually see this through. Is it going to be a negligent type claim, or should that be covered under workers' comp? Would it be an intentional tort type claim? I'm not quite sure how it would play out, but if there is that claim, my thought is, again, if you're doing these things, you put yourself in the most defensible position that you can. You have policies and procedures. Your employees are aware of it. You can show and trace that your employees receive the policies and procedures and that you're consistently following them the best you can. Your managers are trained. These types of things, if you can show it and do it, to me, that's the best defense that you can. Otherwise, it's so hard to prevent it because even with the temperature checks, like I was talking about all the issues with it, someone could have a fever and not have COVID.
Right.
They could have something else, or they could be asymptomatic and have it and then come into your facility. As far as what to do if someone tests positive, those are protocols we can talk through, certainly more specifically to your business, but generally it would be to make sure you notify the local health authorities and work with them. Because a lot of times, at least with the cases we've seen with our clients where they've had an employee test positive, the local health department is actually working more directly on that contact tracing. And so also notifying employees that potentially could have been impacted within close contact. And that's, not telling the person by name, keeping the person confidential, but making sure those employees know that they have come in contact with this individual. Also, you may need to close down your facilities for a deep cleaning, deep sanitation, and working again with the Department of Health on when it's appropriate to open again. Because it may not be maybe a week, it may be a couple of days. It depends on the circumstances. And then, of course, like Debbie's talking about, sending that email to all employees, and not identifying the employee by name, but just that this happened and all the measures that you're taking to rectify it, the deep cleaning, instilling and reiterating your policies and procedures with respect to social distancing and sanitation and hygiene. And so all of those things I think are going to matter. But I can't promise there aren't going to be claims because that's what I do foresee, which is why we're talking here, taking that preventative, proactive approach to it. Adrienne, any thoughts on that?
Similar to what you said, but I think particularly to the extent that these claims would be in the negligence arena, like you mentioned, it all comes down to a reasonableness standard to a large degree. And I think as of right now, the reasonableness standard is going to be somewhat determined, at least in the state, by the requirements that are set forth. And so again, that's why it's so important for your business right now to understand and be implementing these minimum requirements. And as a lot of you probably are aware, it's not just the minimum requirements in Kentucky, but there have also been industry specific requirements put out. So you not only need to know these minimum requirements, but you need to go out there and search for your industry specific requirements, because that's going to be another layer of guidelines that you have to be aware of before you all start operating again.
I've got a question about that, from the litigation standpoint. Right now, there are so many things we still don't know about this. Mm-hmm. And I can just say from the idea of contact tracing, very good idea. But what I'm wondering about is how many years do you think it will be before any litigation cases do come out? Because there's not enough data. There's no case law at this point. And so I'm wondering if this is a time when companies need to build up reserves in the event that something like this happens. Do you have any thoughts about that?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think some cases will be filed fairly quickly if that happens. I think there already are some employment cases being filed, and Faith can talk more on that maybe, but I've seen an employment case or two, at least in Kentucky, that's already been filed that is going to open up some of these issues. And not so much, I'll clarify, not so much I think on the somebody had COVID-19 and transferred it to others, but more on the refusal to work from home or something like that those kinds of cases are coming up more. Again, I'll give you the it depends answer now, Bill, but it is really
Thank you. I've been waiting.
A time frame. And so I don't know. I mean, I think, again, one of the overall focuses of the requirements is you just have to kind of be putting steps in place. I would say reserves, talking to insurance, making sure, kind of exploring a lot of those options right now. But I think, with the requirements, with the contact tracing and things like that in the Kentucky standards, it's really about making sure your employees understand the requirements, making sure that they cooperate. Again, it goes with the communication that Debbie was talking about, and that I think was a pretty key to last week's session. You have to communicate with your employees. You have to have a plan in place. You want to make sure that as much information is out there to them as you can provide, so that everybody can kind of work together to move forward on this.
Okay, I have one more question, and then Debbie, I know you've got these questions. Is there any guidance on how long we need to keep information about what we did? So think document retention, compliance requirements. How long, if you know, how long should someone keep the story of what they did for their employees through this whole scenario?
Yeah, that actually has come up a couple times, and there's different factors that come into play. I mean, it depends on the claim. We've got various things from the EEOC to OSHA to state. I think a lot of the Kentucky discrimination is 5 years, so it's probably our most conservative answer is probably 5 years, maybe even longer at this point, unless we know more and until we know more.
Okay.
Because we're not sure how those claims are going to come in and how long people have to bring them, depending on what they're actually going to say. I don't know, Adrienne, if there's what the negligence standard is or how long that is, but
it's usually a little less. I think 5 years is probably a pretty comfortable time limit right now, and that should give you some leeway. And I think even more so if a business is aware that there may be a claim, if you have some reason to believe that someone might have a claim, you've got to make sure to keep all of that information and that none of that gets lost, even in normal protocol, because that stuff comes up in litigation and discovery all the time. So you honestly will want to keep that for your business to protect you, so that you, like you said, you can show what you did. Because sometimes if you're like, oh, we don't know, we lost it, we have no records of that, it's not going to be in your favor.
Okay. All right. Well, Debbie's got a great list of questions that we came up with. So Debbie, fire away.
Sure. So we got these in advance when we had the registrations. Someone asked, do I need to have legal work from home agreements for my employees who are continuing to work from home, or is it enough to simply issue guidelines for expectations?
So here's that lawyerly answer. It sort of depends on what you do and how many employees you have and what they're actually doing. An agreement would be wonderful, because then you've got a specific acknowledgement outlining the terms of the work from home arrangement. But having a policy in place that everyone's aware of and that the employees have acknowledged receiving would be sufficient as well. So I think it just depends on maybe even the higher level of folks and what they're doing as well.
Okay. And then one question that came up that I thought was really interesting is this person says that they have contracts with media companies and independent contractors, maybe a website developer, that were put in place prior to the pandemic, that they no longer feel like they can pay for those services because their business has had to be paused or ceased. What are people feel like they sign a contract, that's it. Are there any exceptions to this type of, given the pandemic, are there any exceptions or leeway for companies to not fulfill these agreements?
So much of that is really going to depend on specific provisions that are in those agreements. Some may have provisions that protect you in case of cases like this, a global pandemic. There's a lot of questions right now surrounding those definitions, because obviously this isn't going to be included in many. And like we've said, this issue hasn't been determined by the courts. I think I would advise clients right now, do your best to fulfill those contracts if you can. You don't want to rely on the fact that you think you can throw out there, oh, but there's a global pandemic and I don't have to do this anymore. I wouldn't go with that, because again, there is no guidance right now. There aren't going to be any court decisions we can really look at. There's always analogies. But yeah, I would say do whatever you can to fulfill those obligations in those contracts. And second to that, try to work something out with the other side, rather than just breach the contract, not do it, and not really talk to the other side about it. Try to negotiate. I do think, a lot of businesses do have a sense of we're all kind of in this together, and they are willing to make accommodations, and see if you can work out payment plans, see if you can work out other things so that neither side is stuck.
Sure. Okay. And then the last one that I think probably would apply to several companies, and if they're in the unfortunate situation of having to furlough employees, is there a legal process well documented that they need to follow? I know that
Great question.
I've heard a lot recently about partial furloughs. And my understanding of a furlough had always been that when you were furloughed, you could not be contacted by your employer or expected to do work during the time that you're furloughed. But how does that work with a partial furlough? Because you still might be getting partially paid. So
I haven't actually heard of a partial furlough, and a lot of the distinction comes into place whether it's a layoff or an actual furlough. And I think that those terms can be confused a lot. So a furlough is where you are still anticipating having the employee return at some point. And you typically maintain the benefits, but the employee can get unemployment during the time that they're off. And you're right, you wouldn't recommend communicating with the employee during that time, not supposed to be working. A layoff is more of a permanent separation, whereby they're completely separated and there is not an anticipation of calling the employee back. As far as a protocol to follow, I mean, certainly, when you're making the decisions, documenting the business reasons, justifying the need for making that decision to separate. Because what will happen sometimes is the furlough or layoff, either one, could disparately treat a certain, or disparately have an impact on a certain protected category, whether that's more older people or a certain race or something. And it may not be certainly the intention, but when you do the analysis on who are we actually going to impact here and what does that look like, those are some things to make sure you're looking at. And then again, documenting the needs, because what sort of a worst case scenario when I get a call is we've restructured and we eliminated this position. But then 2 weeks later, and it eliminated this gentleman who was 70 years old. And then 2 weeks later, we needed that position again, and we hired a 25-year-old to fill the role.
Right.
Not great facts for an employment lawyer, just because and it might not have been age discrimination, but it just doesn't look good. So again, documenting and making sure you're following through in that restructuring or that sort of dynamic. And then thinking about separation options, especially during now, do you have a practice that you've typically followed or that you want to start following to do that, and then making it easier for those folks to get unemployment. Now, because, if it's a COVID reason, now we have potentially some other added benefits that they could get. So making that clear in their separation to make it easier for them to get those benefits. Those are some of the guidelines I would think high level that you should be considering.
That's great. Thank you. Well, Bill, do we have any other questions from the panelists?
We do. We've got two, and then there is. Well, now we've got some more. So they are definitely coming in. One of them, essentially, it's less a question. It's a great tip. Whenever in the tech world, whenever something bad happens, we always have to go back and do kind of a root cause analysis and figure out, what's going on. We've heard in the military that they do after action reports and things like that, get debriefed. So Caroline points out that any of this documentation that we're putting together right now could be kept for the next crisis, whatever it may be. And so instead of just saying we're done and just, putting it in a drawer and never looking at it again, I think it's a great tip to share with everyone who's on. Keep that stuff, go back, look and find out if there's a template, probably work with multiple professionals to figure out, do we have everything covered? And then we do these things for our clients that it's basically a tabletop exercise. What do we do if X happens? And then we walk through, and that's how we refine the processes and the procedures if we suspect that there might be a data breach or something like that in the tech space. So, Caroline, thank you for sending that one in. We do have another question. So, This one is kind of neat. It says our industry requires us to conduct site inspections at our clients' offices at times. Many of our smaller clients work from their homes or in a home office area used for business. So we've got to go into their homes to conduct the inspection. Should companies whose employees handle sensitive like medical or legal information or personal information ensure that can be safeguarded and work from home? And can we do a site inspection to go into people's homes right now when we don't know if it's properly safeguarded?
Great question. And more specific. I mean, I think given the situation, we would have to be as cautious as possible. So perhaps that's a client type of screening that you do and that you call ahead of time and make sure that you have parameters in place that the client, before we would be able to service that client, have or answer the different health screening questions that you would an employee. Have you contracted COVID in the last 14 days, or have you been around anyone in close contact who has, and those sorts of questions that you would put together. But I think it absolutely, I would do that as a safety protocol, because what you wouldn't want, of course, is to send your employee there and it's not safe. And then they get the virus because of it or some other issue.
Okay. So we are kind of at the end. We try to end right around 4:45 each day. Debbie, would you like to talk about who might be joining us next week?
Sure. So thank you guys so much, Adrienne and Faith. That was really helpful. And thank you to the attendees who took the time to write the questions and participate with us. Again, Bill's going to send out a survey and he'll give you some wrap-up remarks as well. But be sure to send us your ideas for future speakers. For the next few weeks, we have representation from the retail and manufacturing sector next week with a team member from the marketing department at Tempur Sealy, who has recently conducted some really interesting consumer research with regard to kind of what the consumer mindset is in terms of purchase patterns and what they plan to be spending their money on, which I think will be really helpful for local businesses as they're seeking to reopen. And then we also are going to be working with two financial planners for 2 weeks from today that are going to be talking to us again a little bit about what not to do right now, which is of course panic, but also some things that we can be doing to protect the precious dollars that we do have. So with that, I thank you again, everybody, so much for the opportunity. And Bill, I'll turn it over to you for closing remarks.
Yeah, so what we'll do, so as Debbie said, ladies, thank you very much for this. What will happen next is as we end this, we've got a little link to a survey. We'd love to know your feedback on how we've done today. There's also links over to the material that the ladies from Dinsmore provided. If you do have any sort of technical questions or some follow-up items, send those to us. We're building a resources page on the web for things like these back-to-work checklists. So if your company's actually developed something that you may want to share, feel free to send that in to me. It's my email address that you get from the Zoom system, so everybody's got that. But if you do have something that you'd be interested in sharing with the group, just to expand this, everyone is trying to help one another and get through this together, feel free to send that in to me, and we'll get some of those things listed. So when we finish today, what's going to happen is that this video is going to upload. I'm going to put it in an email. You'll get a replay. You can share it. It'll be on YouTube as well. And I just want to say one more time, thanks for everyone coming together and donating their time, giving us all these questions. And with that, we are wrapped up for today. It is now time to listen to the governor.
Everybody.
Yep. Have a great day.